Hello and welcome to another video. You may have seen on my channel a video I did about the new features in Autodesk Maya 2022, and one of those new features is the update to the USD plugin. Now, I covered some of the workflow in that video, but what I wanted to do is go a little bit more deeper and explain things a little bit more thoroughly to perhaps maybe those people who weren't too familiar with USD or hadn't really integrated it yet into their workflow or pipeline. So this is what this video is really about. I'm not going to talk about USD as a concept. There's lots of reading online about what that actually is, and I'll include some links in the description below so you can read them at your own leisure. In the meantime, though, check out this video. I really hope you find it useful, and thanks for watching. In the new version of Maya, there's been a number of improvements to the MayaUSD workflow. This is building upon the first iteration of the plugin that was released last year by Autodesk. Now, they released two versions of the plugin. They have a compiled version which you can just load in straight into Maya, or people could choose to download the source code from Github, because USD is completely open source, and this enabled people to try and incorporate USD into their own pipelines and tailor it to their own particular needs. Now, in the new version of Maya, there's been a number of improvements to the workflows and how you bring in USD data into Maya, and also how you work with it once you have it inside Maya. The first area I want to look at is how data is imported into Maya and the differences in how you import it and now how you work with it. The normal method when the plugin was first introduced was to simply just import USD data into Maya. And this allowed anybody to take a USD file and simply import it into Maya and continue to work on it inside Maya. I'm going to use the Pixar kitchen set as my sample. The options there's just been a slight change to these options. We now have the ability to have materials and also convert materials as well. So if the data inside this USD data set has any specific shaders and they've been converted, then we can choose to convert them to any one of these options. And of course, if you've used the source code and implemented your own plugin, then this allows you to plug in your own render support here as well. There's also still the hierarchy view. So what we can do is we can look at the USD structure, see what it contains before we load it. We can choose to load up a specific variant by default, or even selectively choose a particular prim to load in instead of loading the entire data set. I'm going to keep everything as it is and just import. This will take the USD data and convert it into like a Maya format, really. And that enabled users to use it in the normal Maya way. And you'll see that when I've brought it in, when I select the kitchen set here, it populates in the attribute editor and I can extend out the hierarchy in the usual way, which is perfectly fine. And that's it. I've just brought in my USD file. I can now make changes to this. I can introduce other geometries, group it, put it in the hierarchy. And then when I'm finished and I want to save it back out as a USD file again, I can simply go to export selection, choose USD. And now I've got my options here to make it binary or ASCII. I can now convert these materials out so that shade information is contained now, exported with the file. So that's really handy for going into another package which also has Arnold. And that was all perfectly fine. We've now got that round trip workflow. Now there's another way of bringing in the data set, but also allows you to work in the way that USD works. And that's done by going to the create menu and choosing here the universal scene description option. And this time there's two options now. And the one we're going to look at is stage from file. And we select this. I'm going to choose the same data set as before. You'll notice there's fewer options here. Just going to bring it in, create, and see how quick that was. And it was significantly quicker than the previous import because there's been no conversion here, really. What we're dealing with now is, you could say, pure native USD data, but inside Maya. And if we look at the attribute editor now, even with the top prim selected, you'll see that it looks very different. There's a number of different options here which we didn't have before. We can see the root layer, the default prim, file path. We can even look at the display and change over to, say, proxy to render. And that's something we didn't have before. And you'll notice that the icon badge here in the outline has also changed, and this is actually the USD um, official badge. And straight away it looks different, and therefore we're not gonna. This gives you more of a visual cue when working in Maya, so you know what type of data you're working on. But the real benefit here is if you turn on the shapes in the outliner, we can now extend out the hierarchy. But this time you'll notice that the branches look very different. And that's because this is now native USD data. And you'll notice as well that some of the icon badges have now changed. And we've now got a few things here which we didn't usually have. And this is now representing USD data in a different way. So for example, if we look at this here, we can just hover over this kitchen one. There's a small little kind of arc there. This is a composition arc. And that's a term that you should be familiar with when you're working with USD data. And again, when we select that, we can see that we've got a whole bunch of different options here, which we otherwise didn't have. If I scroll down, we can see here there's these icons have got like a slight V next to it. And that's telling me it's a variant. And again, variant is something you should be also familiar with if you're working with USD data. But what that basically means is that now in the outliner, because I'm bringing in native USD data, I can work with it in that particular way, which means when I right click in the outliner now, I now have a new contextual menu, which provides me with options for working with this USD data. So this is a variant. I can scroll down here and choose variant sets, and I've got a model invariant, and I can choose to swap out a different pan if I want to. And this now starts to now bring in the benefits of USD, particularly when you're bringing in a single stage and your different department and you want to work on this data. If we look at the other options available to us, we can choose to unload the variant, so the prim completely, and you'll notice this will completely vanish. I can choose to load it back in again. I can choose to make it invisible. I can even choose to deactivate the prim as well, and you'll notice that when I do that, I get the this line through the name here, and of course I can just reactivate it. If I want to, I can choose to expand out here into the geometry, and I can choose to add a new prim. And we've got a number of different options here, which all give us different capabilities that are in accordance with the USD schema. We can choose like a scope or a depth, and if you're working with USD, you'll be very familiar with those particular terms. So already we're working in a very different way than just bringing in USD model data. We're now actually working on USD sets and USD stages, which before we just weren't able to do. If we right click the menu again, there's another option here called the USD Layer Editor. And this brings up a new feature for being able to work with layers inside USD data as well. This was something that wasn't possible before either. I'm not going to go into this right this moment. I'll come to this in another part of the video. But what this enables me to do now is I can now add multiple layers into this data set in accordance with whether I'm working on a shot, sequence, or department. And I'm going to show you how you do that. Now, one thing you can also do with this is you can have both types of data occupy the same Maya scene. In this very basic scene, I've got this car geometry with some Arnold shaders assigned to it. I've also got a very simple lighting setup and a basic plane to give me a ground. And I've organized my assets here into a very basic rudimentary structure so that I can break things apart and maybe start to export different things separately. What I can do now is choose to export this as a USD format. This doesn't exist as USD before this. This was all done natively in Maya. I want to make this a USD format and share it with maybe another team or even another studio. I can now just choose File, Export Selection, and I can go to, I'll just name it here. I'll just put Bugatti, and just I've looked at my options. I've got Arnold shaders assigned to this, so I'm going to keep this here to make sure that data is exported from the Maya scene and then created inside the USD. I'm going to keep everything as is and just export selection. Now I've done that, I can actually load this back into this same scene. But this time I can, well, I've got two options. I can choose to bring it back in as standard USD model, but that's only going to produce the same hierarchy as this, and I've already got it inside my scene already, so I don't need to do that. What I can now do is I can then go to my create menu and bring this in as a USD stage. And this time I can then actually choose to um, work on it as if it's USD data. If I bring that back in, you'll see that my icon's there as well. And if I just move it over here, you see we've got both types of data inside my scene. If I was now to look at this file and go to shapes, expand out the hierarchy, we can now see that my hierarchy there is color coded in accordance with USD. And this means that straight away, if I was to bring this scene into, or bring this data set into Maya, I can see straight away from these visual cues that this is native USD data and this is just normal Maya data. And as we can see though, all the data is actually there. If we scroll to the very bottom, you'll notice there's a new node here, and this is the scope. So if I right click this and add a new prim, this scope node, this is what this node here, and this is useful for containing information that's not going to be transformed like materials. And if I expand this out, we can see these are my Arnold shading materials that have been retained in this data set and been imported into my scene. I didn't really name them effectively, so that's why they look slightly odd named. But if I was to expand them all out, you can see that I have actually named some of the material names. So the shader group is here, and we can see that some of these I've named accordingly. So this is a really good way straight away. This already gives us many benefits over the previous workflow, where we can selectively choose how we want to work with USD data. We can bring it in as a simple USD model and work on it in Maya in the usual way, and then export it so we have that round trip workflow. Or we can now choose to bring it in as a native USD format and work with it in the USD schema. Now that we have this extra ability, we can actually now start creating USD hierarchies inside Maya natively. The way to start doing that is, again, to the create menu, choosing universal scene description, but this time we're going to create a new stage with a new layer. Now we get this default here straight away. It's a default name. We can see it's a MayaUSD proxy shape. If we right click that and bring up a USD layer editor, we have an anonymous layer, which is a layer that's held in memory until we actually save it. And this is what this little icon here is as well. Now what I can do here is start to now expand this out. For example, now this is my shape. I may want to right click this and start thinking about adding a new prim. Now I may want to add a transform node, and I could call this anything I want. I could call this maybe front wheel, and then I may want to add a def from here, and I'll just call this FR wheel. And then I can then choose to add a reference. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in part of that Bugatti model because I've already exported some of these things as actual assets. So I had the front wheel. I'm going to just choose the front left wheel, bring that in, and there it is. Now what I can do is I can go back up to here, my front wheel, and then add another X form, and then add another def, and I'll bring in another reference, and I'll just call it the front right wheel. And straight away you'll see that there's some variance here as well. So again, when I bring this data in, because it was exported from Maya with all that data in it, we can see that when I expand it out, it contains the shader groups for these particular models because it's named looks. I can change this if I want to. And again, I can rename these in the same way I would any kind of Maya node. And this is how we build out the hierarchy with the USD schema in mind. And you can see here that the icon badge has been automatically changed because we've got different variations here. We've got different models contained within it. And so again, we've got this complete flexibility to work in with this data or build up our own structures and then export them completely out as USD. I've loaded the Pixar kitchen set back into Maya now, and I've loaded it in as a new stage. So I've got my USD hierarchy. Now we're going to explore the actual USD layer editor. Now I've got my default level here, which is perfectly fine, kitchen set.usd. And what I can do now is I can build up my data structure here in the outliner and in my scene. But now what I want to do is how do I then start to work with this data across teams and departments. And this is where the layer editor really comes in handy. What I can do here is I can start adding multiple layers. And if you're familiar with USD workflow and how layers work and the overrides and the opinions they give, then this is where things can get quite complicated, but also they can be very powerful when you're working with different stakeholders or different departments on a single scene or sequence. Inside the USD Layer Editor, we've got the ability here to create the stage from the new layer and file, which is the same option you also have here. We've then got we've got other options around here about adding extra layers. So I can just add a number of layers here. And at the moment, they're all anonymous because I haven't saved them out. You might call them dirty layers, you might say. What I can also do is select any of these, and then I can drag these into this and make it a sub layer. I can even choose to load an existing layer as well, and I'll come to that in a moment. Now, what I'm going to do now is, at the moment, this little orange icon is telling me that these layers are held in memory, and I haven't saved them out to disk yet. And that's the next thing I need to do. And because once I do that, I can then start using these layers more effectively. And you can right click on the top level here and choose to add a sub layer or even load sub layers here. And we'll come to these options in just a moment. Now I can choose to double click the layer, and I can choose a name for my layer if I want to. Or if I just click the icon here, this brings up a new option box, and this allows me to save the stage and also save the anonymous layers as well. And then I can name these to whatever I want. I can name them all in one go. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, so I've renamed my layers, and what I've done, just to keep it very simple, I followed the basic glossary that Pixar provide in their USD documentation, and the idea of working on, say, a shot and then a sequence. So I've followed this basic naming convention here. But I've noticed I've missed off my main shot.usd file, and I need to correct that now before I proceed. So I've got my sequence as a layer, and then I've got these effects, sequence layout and sequence dressing as a sub layer. I'm just going to click my shot effects and then add parent layer. And what I can do here is then just change this to, or even just click here, and this will give me the ability to change anonymous layer 1, and I'm just going to call this shot.usd. And what I can do is just want to correct the parenting, and now I've got everything all laid out exactly how I want. You'll notice because I've made a change, the icon changes straight away, and this little star next to the name shows that there's been changes to those particular layers and set, and I need to change and I need to save them. When I do that, it tells me that I've made edits to these two files and I need to save all, and that's fine. So now the idea is that I can now move between these different layers and make certain changes. And this will depend on the department or team that I'm working in. As an example, let's look at sequence dressing. And this to say I'm in maybe the asset department, and I want to make a change. And I want to make a change to this refrigerator. But I don't want to basically destroy anything in the asset. I'm just saying that I've had an instruction to change this to remove these pin-up posters and everything, and make it more cleaner. Now we have a variant for that as well, and we can actually change that here. And we can see in the refrigerator, if I right-click that, we've got a variant set, and we've got a bare one or a decorated one, which is perfect. Now what I want to do, I can now go down to my layer and just choose it here. And now I will change that variant, and I'll click this variant sets and quickly change to bare. And you'll notice as soon as I've done that, I've now got a little star next to my name, and this is now changed here to tell me I've made a change. Now what I can do, I can just right click this and just save edits. And when I've done that, that's made a change now, so that basically, but only on this USD file. I haven't actually changed anything here, changed it as a layer. And one of the really cool things about this is we can choose to see the change as well. If I right click this and say print to script editor, if I do that and bring up my script editor, we can see that what's actually done. Now we can see here's the USD layer editor. We can say the kitchen set, the props, the group, the hierarchy, and we can see here the change I've made in the variants, and it's now choosing bear. If I was to change this back, then that would also be populated in the same way. So essentially, we're working in a very non-destructive way. Now those changes have been made, I may wish to perhaps say, well, I want to mute this layer, or I don't want to hide it somehow, so I can see what it looked like in its previous state. And I can do it here by clicking on this little button, which will mute that layer. And if I do that, you'll see the now decorations have now come back. And essentially, you can see in the layer editor, we've got the it's been changed as well, so we can instantly tell whether or not the layer's been muted. And of course, if I want to bring it back, I can just click it again, and I've now gone back to that state. I could choose to remove the layer completely. I can mute it here as well from the drop-down menu, or I could just clear it completely. Again, I've got the flexibility in those options. So if I want to change down to another layer, and say I'm another department, say the layout department, I can choose this layer now. And this to say, for an example, we don't like the way this chair is positioned. We can find it in the outliner, we can find the geometry, and we can then make a change to this as well. Now we can move this around if we want to. We can choose to, let's just say that the pivot is all over there off to one side. So we want to move that over to here so we can actually move it. If I do this, you'll notice as soon as I move it, the icons have now changed and it's shown I've made a change. But I don't like the way the icon is. So this just moved my pivot over very quickly and get it to there. And this is still technically counts as a change. And I just want to maybe just rotate it in so it's a bit more straighter. And I'm just going to move it here as well. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do. So again, what I can do here, save edits, and that's just saved those edits to that particular USD file and layer. And again, I can choose to mute it so I can see it in its previous state, or bring it back in. Now, let's just say, for example, I'm now done. What do I do with this? Well, I can actually now remove all these layers from this scene. These are the ones where we can assume we've made some changes here. But the things to remember here is just go between different layers, and any changes you make will be on that layer only. Now I'm going to choose, I can just simply remove them completely. And you'll notice as soon as I've done that, the file has reverted back to its original state. And that's because that's what it was when I imported it into our scene. And this essentially, these are layers that I can control things. I can just now remove these completely, and then I can save this out again. So I can save this, I can make these edits to this one as well. Now what I could do, I've just really removed them and just save these edits to this file as well. And then I can start all over again and reload it back in on another day in another department, and maybe even in another studio. So what we're going to do now, we're going to continue working on that kitchen set, but say it's on a different day, a different team, different studio, even maybe a different user. And we want to bring in the kitchen set again. And again, this could be part of another part of the pipeline. We could be further on in a production, and we want to go back and revisit that and make some changes based on the feedback we've received from our client. So I'm just going to bring in the stage again. And as you can see, it's brought in its original form, which is exactly what we want. And now what I do is I will simply load in the layers which are relevant to me and the department I'm working in, and also the changes that I need to make. So what I can do here in my USD Layer Editor now is choose load an existing layer. And again, I can choose the path, and I'm going to choose the sequence. This was the main parent layer, and we had dressing and layout underneath it. And that's really important when working with layers, about the hierarchy and what overrides which. We're going to load those in, and you can see now load sub layers, and you can see as soon as I've loaded those in, things have changed. We've now got back to our clean refrigerator, and we've now got to our chair, which is straight in accordance with this one here. So this enables me to load in that data and those edits on top of the existing file, and look at it from my point of view based on the changes I may have made previously. And then what I can do, I can then choose to continue that as well. But of course, I may want to go back and look at it again. So I could just mute the dressing, mute the layout, and I can see what it was in its previous state. And then bring it back,
choose the layout again, and then make some changes, and then resave that back out as a USD file. And this is the advantage of working in USD, is it enables different teams and people to work on the same data at different times of their productions. And also, it's very non-destructive. I could be in, say, the layout department or even the asset department, and I can bring in and make those changes as well. I can even start thinking about adding new data to this as well on this new layer. So when I import this layer and say set dressing, it could be that we may want to go back to the decorated version of the refrigerator, but maybe move one of these notes or even add a new prim to this hierarchy. Well, that still enables me to do that. And so long as I do it here and it's on this layer, those edits will be retained on that layer and I can load them in at another time. So once again, we're really leveraging the benefits of USD now, having the ability to bring in USD data natively into Maya and work on it in that way really allows us to really reap the rewards of working with USD, and that can work in our entire pipeline.
And finally, there's also been enhancements to facilitate the rendering and display of USD objects in Maya. And perhaps the most crucial component of that is the introduction of Hydra. I'm not going to go into what Hydra is. There's plenty of material online, and I'll include some of the links to those materials in the description below. But what Hydra is essentially, from a very high level view, it's an open source framework which facilitates the scene graph data to a renderer. And in Maya 2022, that's available through a plugin. And you might notice this in your list, this M2OH.mml. This is the Maya to Hydra plugin now. And once you've got that loaded, this allows you to tap into Hydra. And then if you've got the means or you want to, you can then start directing that data to your own particular renderer. Arnold is the default renderer in Maya now. So included in the plugin is also all the bits you need to render your USD objects in Hydra. You can also Arnold's been updated to support USD data as well. And once loaded in the menu, you can go to your scene export and you have the ability now to export Arnold data as a selection or export all to USD. In the viewport now, I've got viewport 2.0 turned on, but we now have using the Hydra plugin, we now have the ability to go OpenGL with Hydra. And you can see I've just quickly changed that and you see the visual difference. But more importantly to some, you now have the ability to use Arnold with Hydra. And when you turn this on, this is now the Arnold renderer displaying rendered in my viewport, but it's using Hydra to tap into the USD framework. And as you can see, it renders very quickly. And this is, again, one of the benefits of working with USD data. This is a lot quicker than what it would be if you had normal Maya data in the scene. But obviously that will depend, of course, the complexity of the data and how big the scene you've got actually open. And of course, if I wanted to, I could flip to Arnold, but once you do this, this actually now flips to the normal Arnold renderer, and to do that I'd have to include lights of the camera as well to get the most out of the visual fidelity. And also I don't know what materials or shaders this has got assigned to it either, so I'd have to add a lot more things to my data in order to get the best out of the Arnold renderer. But this is already pretty good, and it gives me a good enough visual fidelity to see what's going on and then make some more creative decisions. So to summarize, USD and Maya has seen a massive improvement with Maya 2022. And if you've been looking at USD and been thinking about maybe utilizing it or looking to integrate it in your pipeline, and so far you haven't done, then I think with Maya 2022, now is the time to really start to consider it. And also Maya have updated the source code on their GitHub site as well, so you can now download the same source code as what's in the plugin that ships with Maya. When you add all these things up together, I think now's a very good time to start looking at USD if you haven't otherwise done so. So I really hope this has been useful about understanding USD in Maya and how the new version of the plugin works in the latest version of Maya. If you want to know more about the other features in Maya 2022, I have done another video which is available on this channel. Be sure to check that out, and I really hope you find that useful as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.